Thank you so much for joining us. We're here for another installment of our webinar series to talk about college admissions, real talk, real conversation, helpful information. We have two wonderful guests with us tonight who are going to introduce themselves shortly as people are queuing into the room. I also have a co-moderator tonight, and so I'm Bari Norman, and I'm here to ask some questions that came from the audience and also some that we generated ourselves. And I also have Christina DeCesare here with me, who will be introducing herself in a moment. And we're here from Expert Admissions and here to hopefully make the most of the hour together. So Christina, I'll hand it over to you, and please introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Christina DeCesare. As Bari said, I'm a senior admissions counselor with Expert Admissions, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And I'll just share a little bit of my background for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of chatting with before. Prior to joining EA, I was a college counselor at a school, an independent school in New Jersey. And before that, I actually worked on the college side in the admissions world for about 10 years, reading applications at both New York University and Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. So it's always great when we get to see our college side colleagues again. So it would be great if we could have our panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Tysha, and then we'll move over to Laurie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tysha Vulcain-Murrell. I'm an assistant director at Tulane University, New York Regional. I've been working in college admissions for a few years, and I'm really excited to share some information with you all, talk through the Common App, and hopefully provide some helpful information. Laurie, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Laurie Wax. I am the New York Regional Recruiter for Penn State. I've been with Penn State for about a year. I was with University of Massachusetts Lowell for about 6 years before that. I also wear a parent hat. I have put 3 children through college, and I've been through this process, so I truly understand all of the emotions and the worries and the excitement that you're going through right now.
Thank you both. And before we get started with our planned questions and things for this evening, we're just wondering, Tysha, if you could maybe, in light of the most recent hurricane, just tell us a little bit about how the Tulane community is doing right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. I'm sure many of you have seen in the news that the city of New Orleans and Louisiana has been really impacted by this hurricane. And so, of course, our priority is keeping our students, staff, faculty safe in this moment. We're taking a little time off just to give people, some time and space to handle things that they need to. I know the Office of Undergraduate Admission will be up and running coming next week in a virtual manner, so we can still connect with families and answer questions and provide the support that prospective students and families may need once we make sure that our students, staff, and faculty are taken care of. So structurally, we'll be okay in some time. New Orleans is a really resilient city, and so we appreciate you all keeping us in your thoughts during these times.
Thank you, and we're sending our well wishes. So let's get into some of the things that our guests tonight want to know about. So both of your institutions receive far more applications than you have room for in your class. So how are you able to differentiate amongst the tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of applications that you receive? Anyone can go first.
Laurie, you can start.
Sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, and I speak for Penn State, I think many universities are the same. The first and foremost thing that we are looking at is your academic record, your high school transcript. So that is definitely the first thing that we're looking at. But again, we do have at Penn State we have 275 different majors. We have 12 different academic colleges. So we're looking to fill all of them, and we're looking at a lot of different factors. We look at, all the different aspects of your application are important. I think for a large public research university like Penn State, they come into play more for students that are kind of, they're the students that are clearly, really high academic achieving students that are, pretty much clearly very admissible. There are students that are really on the opposite end that maybe, we would not see as being super successful at, certainly at our main campus at University Park. However, for many students that are right in the middle, all of these other factors do come into play when we have limited spots and more students to fill. So, again, the first thing that we are looking at are your grades and the rigor of your coursework that you're taking while you're in high school.
Yeah, I think very similarly. We want to make sure that any student that comes to Tulane is a good academic fit, that you aren't going to struggle immensely by being enrolled here, that you can get the support that you need to succeed academically. And so that's kind of the initial priority. And then looking through, extracurriculars, other things that we can see in your application. There is no one type of Tulane student. We don't need all of the presidents of, student government, for example. We want to see your different interests and the different things that you'll bring to our community. And I think sometimes even if we're able to see in your application that you're really excited to be here, sometimes that can play a role ultimately in deciding between applicants when we get down to those fine nitty-gritty details. So a lot of factors for sure.
And as a follow-up question for both of you, but I think maybe even especially for Laurie, just as a bigger institution, oftentimes people say, do they really read everything with so many applications? I know it's a basic question, but could you speak to that briefly?
Absolutely. I read everything. I can speak to, for myself, even for students that are, clearly the top grades, top scores, or, on the opposite side of the spectrum, I read everything. And again, it really comes into play for where, I'm in the middle, the students that are kind of right in the middle where I have limited spots, and I absolutely take the time to, look at everything, certainly look at what activities students are involved in. I also often notice that sometimes students underestimate what they do and the value in it. When I see that a student is working, has a job, they're working 20 hours a week and they're still doing well in school, I put so much value in that because that shows a lot of responsibility, somebody that's really able to manage their time and still be successful. So, that's something often that students don't think to include in their applications, but, even home responsibilities, taking care of siblings or grandparents. So, I do look at everything, but again, even the best essay is not going to make up for grades that are really, that we don't see as admissible, or really we don't see as somebody who would be able to be successful. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want to, have students that are going to be great fits, but also that are going to be successful and that are going to graduate on time and thrive at our university. So, I definitely do read everything that is in your application.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say very similar. One thing that I would add though is, let's say I'm getting 15 letters of recommendation for one student, for example. By the end, the level of detail in which I am reading the recommendations may vary a little bit. And so sometimes less is more. We want to view your application holistically. We want to really take a deep dive into who you are as a student and as a scholar. But also sometimes a little less material can allow us to do that in a way that is more beneficial to the applicant that's applying, for sure.
Thank you for making that point. It is such an important one.
I was just going to add to that and say, at Penn State, we actually do not require a recommendation other than if you're applying to our honors college or our pre-medical medical program. But, certainly if I get the recommendations, I read them. But there are many universities that have a limit to what you're supposed to send. And my best recommendation is whatever a school tells you to send, no more and no less. There's a reason that there are, specifications as to what you should include in your application.
Great, thank you. You each have your different territories that you're responsible for as you're meeting students and talking to them and encouraging them to apply to your schools if you think it's the right fit. Is there such a thing as high schools having good relationships with certain colleges? And is it easier to get in from one school versus another school?
I would love to start with this one. I would say for our university, we love schools that want to get to know us, so we can really get to know the school. It helps if I am reading your transcript and I know exactly how many IBs or APs that your school offers without me even needing to look at the school report because I've built that rapport with your counselor. So that can totally be helpful. Now, I can't say that it helps you get in anymore, but it definitely gives me context to understand you as an applicant and you as a student in the context in which you are learning. So definitely can be helpful. Will it make or break your application? Probably not. But I think additional information is always helpful. And so if your counselor wants to get to know us, we're happy to do that and to start building those relationships for sure.
I would echo that exactly. I mean, there are definitely high schools that I know the counselor is a little bit better. And it's, certainly when they reach out on behalf of a student, it's definitely helpful for me to, if I know them, but I wouldn't say I can favor one school over another, because of those relationships, but they definitely do help, help us to, help us evaluate you.
Right. Great. And, something else that families ask us sort of related to that is, does it matter if a student is at a public high school or a private high school? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So we evaluate every student within the context of their own high school. So if you're at a school where they offer a lot of APs, for example, and you're not taking them, we might notice that. Whereas if you're at a school that doesn't offer them, then we're not going to penalize you for that. So we really review every student within the context of their own high school. There's no benefit to being in one high school over another. We really just look at each individual high school situation.
Great.
Yeah, I think context is what matters. And so private or public, let's say you're at a school that is really short-staffed in counseling, I'm not going to penalize you as the student for the fact that your letter of recommendation isn't as in-depth or that the counselor didn't know you as well. And so we're not going to use the type of school that you attend or the circumstances of your institution against you because you have no control over that. You're just a student trying to learn and trying to get into a college that's a good fit. So no preference either way.
Thank you.
And as far as the application reading process goes, that's like a big black box for most people. And they're very interested in sort of what actually happens, like once you submit an application. Could you share with us at each of your schools how applications are read? Like, is it broken up by geography? And, does each application get read once or twice? Or, just kind of just literally sort of the process an application goes through from start to finish on your end once a student hits submit?
So we do break up by territory. However, with close to 100,000 applications, I'm not reading. I mean, not that they're all from my area, but I get more applications from my territory than I could possibly read by myself. So there are, many people reading it. We do not do it by committee. We're individually reading each application and basing those decisions. I mean, there are certain, criteria that we're looking for to keep things consistent, but for the most part, it's just one read, with the exception of if there's any kind of an appeals process, then that would be going to a committee. But generally speaking, we are just reading, the applications. One person is reading the application.
We definitely read a little bit differently at Tulane. Typically, your regional counselor will be the first to do a primary read on your application. So for all of my New York applicants, that would be me. I would be the first read. I would give my recommendation. Applicants will then go to committee, which is typically like senior leadership in our office. And then ultimately our dean makes the final decision on every single applicant that applies to Tulane University. And so that's kind of the final say. But of course, committee, the first read, all of those recommendations are taken into account. At the end of all of that, though, if I have a student that I was really excited about in the first read and the dean decided not to admit them or vice versa, that's a conversation that we're allowed to have as your regional counselor. And so sometimes those are additional conversations that are had. And so there are definitely a few steps along the way and multiple people seeing your application to get a holistic view on you as an applicant, but also the larger picture, our larger class, what that's looking like as a collective and larger institutional goals or values that we may be trying to achieve for that academic cycle.
So Tysha, Tulane there are multiple individuals reading the application, but there's not a committee process where multiple people are coming together and either doing a vote or something like that.
So there is a committee that's leadership who may be having those discussions, but then the dean still gets the final say.
Got it. Thank you. And then what about if you could walk us through how you personally see an application and read it? Like, what's the order? And how does it, are you looking at a screen? Is it getting printed out for you and you're looking at it? If you could kind of take us through that.
Yeah, I typically read on a screen. A lot of people in my office, I know we'll do a duo screen so you can see more information at the same time. I find it super helpful when I can like see your transcript and your extracurricular, and I feel very quickly like I get a feel of, oh, well, these are the APs that they took on Tuesday. Now, oh, yep, they had this after school club. It gives me like, I'm getting a flow of the student's day, which I really enjoy. But typically, you know, we start with who the student is, where they're from, jump into your extracurricular engagements, your transcript, your personal statement, your optional supplements, which I'm happy to talk more about. But for Tulane, a lot of those optional statements matter like a lot for us. So the optional statements is definitely something that we take a good amount of time on. And then we transition mostly lastly into the letter of recommendations.
Thank you. We have questions for you coming up about supplemental essays. People are asking questions about test optional and scores. Just stay with us and we have those questions coming.
So yeah, and I am looking on a screen. I have 2 monitors and a laptop that I'm on. So I'm looking at 3 different things at a time. Usually we don't take transcripts at Penn State. We ask that students fill out their own self-reported academic record. We call it the SRAR. So we're basically relying on you to put in your academic record. And I'm looking at that. I'm certainly then looking at your high school to see what, I see what classes you're taking, and then I look to see what classes are offered. And then I usually look at your activities. It's personal preference. People look at different orders. For me, the essay is always the cherry on the top. I love the essay. So it's the thing I usually read last, and it kind of gives context. And then, if I do have recommendations, I'll read those. But, the essay is always the opportunity that somebody has to speak directly to us. But the first thing I am looking at is your self-reported academic record.
Great. And thanks for reminding our listeners about the self-reported academic record at Penn State. That is different from the Tulane process and different than many private schools that students might be applying to. So, and this is you both kind of touched on this in your last responses, but a lot of questions we get from students and their parents about the activity list and the order of their activities and wondering if the order matters. And so, the Common App gives students the instructions to list them in order of importance to the student. But do you have any advice that you can share with our students who maybe have questions about, even with that instruction, how do I list my activities, in what order? They really sometimes get caught up in that piece.
I think it's fine to list them in the order of importance to you. That is important to know, what you were most passionate about, what you cared about, what you spent most of your time doing. So for me anyway, the order doesn't matter. What's sometimes interesting is I won't see activities on the Common application, and then I'll look at a recommendation and the counselor has listed all these things that a student is involved with. So I just definitely, do not be modest on your resume, on your college application. All these things that you do matter. We'd like to know about them. It doesn't matter the order. It doesn't matter what they are, but it's how you spend your time and what's important to you that we'd like to know.
I agree. And yet, like a small asterisk, if you have a really cool, random, unique thing that you do, put that first. I just think it can be an eye catcher. Yes, we'll see it regardless of where it is in terms of order. But we're reading lots of applications in a day. And so if you have something really unique to yourself, take that moment to brag about yourself and this cool thing that you do and lead with that. So that's my only little caveat.
Tysha, not to put you on the spot, but do you have a really cool, unique activity that's stuck out in your mind that you're thinking of as you share this example with us?
This is 1 in a million, probably. So not the best example, but we had a national rodeo competition winner, and I've never even been to a rodeo. I thought that was super cool when you won on a national level, and that was towards the middle/bottom. And I think I was just very confused. Like, I would have led with that if I was a national winner personally, but maybe that's my own personal bias showing there.
Gotcha. But that is cool. I haven't been to a rodeo either.
Also, sometimes students, they do things that are pretty, like, to them, they think, oh, it's almost so much a part of them that they don't think of it as an extracurricular activity. Whether it's a hobby that they really spend a ton of time on and are very consistent with, and they're like, well, that's not a club at school or an organization, and they think it doesn't belong on the activities list. And even Laurie made the mention of like a job or even certain caretaking responsibilities or whatever. And so I think sometimes the sense of what should be on that activities list is narrower than what we would like to recommend.
Right. I always tell students that it doesn't have to be a school activity. It doesn't even have to be a community activity. It's really, how do you spend your time? What are you involved? What do you do that you love to do in your free time? So certainly it's great to hear about your organized activities, but we want to hear about everything that you are, passionate about doing.
Right. And do you think that students should upload a resume if the activity section captures everything that they do?
I mean, if there's more detail that is important for them to provide, then, certainly yes. But I think they can pretty much include, the Common Apps that I see, the list of activities seem to be pretty inclusive. I find more often that they're just not including things on that list as opposed to necessarily needing a resume. But certainly, if you have a great resume, if you want to be a little bit more specific than the Common App allows for, there's no downside.
Yeah, completely agree. Not necessary to include. The Common App typically captures what we're looking to see. And if the thought of a resume stresses you out, we're literally giving you an out not to have to make one. So take advantage of that if helpful. But if you have a great one and you want to share it, then of course, we're happy to review it additionally.
We try to remind students, and you can tell us if you agree or disagree, is to really try to use the space in the application to the best of your ability, since that's what is required and that's what you're focusing on. And that, like Laurie said, if you really can't get important and relevant things in, you can do a few activities, but no need to repeat per se in a resume, but, kind of add the extra things that are important and relevant in additional information or something like that. But to try as best you can, as limited as it is, to use the space that's given, trying to look out for you guys also. With what you're doing. And moving on to essays a little bit and talking about, like we were just saying with Tysha, something memorable. One of the big stressors for students, as you can imagine, is the main essay in particular, but then once they get to the supplements too, which we'll get to in a bit. But can you speak a little bit about just approach to the essay, a memorable essay on your end that stuck with you? I think so often students feel like there has to be this life-altering, earth-shattering, unique, as if there is such a thing as a unique human experience, that we can all relate to. They think that it has to be something out of this world. And maybe if you could share a memorable essay and maybe some tips for students who are sitting there saying, I don't really feel like I have anything to say, or I don't feel like I have anything that's unique to share.
So really and truly, the essay is your opportunity to speak directly to the person reading your application. By the time you're a senior applying to college, your transcript is set, your activities for the most part are set. You don't have control over what is written in your recommendations, but the essay is your opportunity to have full control and to just give us a little slice of who you are and what is important to you. And without a doubt, some of the best essays that I've read have not been anything earth-shattering or life-altering. I mean, you don't have to, certainly if you've had an obstacle that you overcome, you can certainly write about that, and that would be, great. But you don't have to have overcome an obstacle. I read an essay once that I thought was one of the best essays, and it was a student talking about the different books that she had read, and they were some of them were just children's books, and some of them were older, kind of through the years, and the different things that she was experiencing at times in her life reading, while she was reading these different books. I mean, it was simple. It was reading books and how it applied to you. I read another one about a student's commute to school every day and the different things he saw along the way on the subway, and how he, just his whole processing of what was going on and how he read things. I mean, it's just, there's so many things that are simple, a day in your life, that are so impactful, because it just gives us a chance to hear you in your voice. So you definitely don't have to have anything. I always recommend, sometimes I'll do essay writing workshops, and there's more than one thing that would be interesting for you to write about. It's hard if you put the pressure on yourself to say, I have to figure out the perfect topic and the perfect essay. It could make you just freeze. I mean, it's just very overwhelming. So if there are several different things that you're interested in, I recommend start writing. Just start writing. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't worry about it. It's just a draft, but write about 3 completely different topics, maybe an activity that you're very passionate about that you really couldn't go into detail on your resume about, and you don't want to list your activities in your essay. But if there's something that's really impacted you, or maybe you want to go into a certain thing because of a thing that you were involved with, that's one possible topic. A day in your life, there's so many different things. Baking. I mean, people have written about, their experience baking with their family. I mean, there's so many different things that are so simple, but try a few different things, and one is going to really stand out to you, and the others might come in handy for supplemental essays. So I just don't limit yourself to one topic. Try to write a few different things. Something will flow more than the others.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice, Laurie, or even like telling students, once you have a few of those topics, pretend you're just writing in a journal and get the thoughts on paper and see what comes to you. I think when you make the stakes a little bit lower, you can often fall in love with your essay in a different way than if it feels like this high stakes thing that you have to write for colleges and universities. I know one of my favorite essays was about a student who was from a city, and she was writing about her love of gardening, and how, her mom forced her to do this thing that she actually didn't even want to do. And like her process of falling in love with this, like now club that she's super passionate about. Honestly, kind of simple, like not transformative in nature, but it was well written. It felt very genuine and honest, and it resonated with the readers. There's another one that comes to mind about a young man who was really passionate about knitting. And he talked about how knitting allowed him to get really close with his grandmother, who taught him how to knit, and what a bonding moment that was for him, and how it taught him patience and all these other things. And I wouldn't have thought that knitting could be such an eloquent personal statement, but it was. And so it doesn't have to be, this light bulb moment, this transformative thing that happened in your life. I don't expect most students to find out how to get the next spaceship to a new planet, or it doesn't have to be that. It's just a way for us to get to know who you are just a little bit more.
Yeah, a simple idea can be really complex, right? That's what we like to tell our students.
And on to another piece of the application, recommendations. So I know Penn State doesn't require them, and there's different, I think one of the things we've obviously learned already tonight is that different schools do things differently, which is why it's always important to check and to be knowledgeable about the process where you're applying. But when it comes to recommendations, oftentimes students wonder, who should they ask? And the knee-jerk reaction may be just a person whose class you got a really high grade in. Can you give some tips for students who are trying to figure out who they should pick to write, or even what in your mind a good recommendation letter is, with the understanding that there are plenty of students either who are in big high schools who may just get more what we might call standard generic letters, which I know you'll speak to, but we know won't hurt a student, but just kind of, how to figure out who to ask.
So I will talk about Tulane, of course. At Tulane, we only require a recommendation from a counselor. Any other recommendation is totally optional, but welcomed, encouraged. I love to read teacher or mentor recommendations as well. And so I think oftentimes counselor recommendations can be hit or miss depending on, how many students a counselor has in their caseload. And again, we're not going to use that against a student if they don't know their counselor well. And so maybe you know that you don't know your counselor as well. And so that additional recommendation really means a lot to you. I never advise going with the class that you got the highest grade in. We can see on your transcript that you did great in that class. And so I'm sure the teacher will also say great things about you. But let's say you have a mentor who you spent a lot of time with, whether it be like after school, office hours, whether it's connecting on a personal level, doing service hours with them, maybe it's a club that they mentored for you. Those are the people that I recommend you ask to write a recommendation for you, because they can speak about you as a student, you as a person, and allow me to see an additional side of you than just your transcript. I love when I get recommendations that are like, and they're super great with their little brother or sister, and like they're mentioning all these things that I wouldn't have expected your ninth grade English teacher to know about you, you know? And so if you have someone who is an adult that you feel knows you a little bit better, go with them. If you don't have a mentor in that capacity, then of course, go with a teacher that can talk about you as a scholar and your engagement in the classroom. That's always a good alternative.
So I agree completely. One of my dear colleagues gives this advice, which I will share because I think it's really great. But if you were to go to school one day and they said, there's not going to be any first period class, just go spend first period with whichever teacher you want to spend first period with, who would that teacher be? And that would be a great person for you to have write your recommendation. So, you know, and we don't require them, though if we get them, we read them, but for certain programs, we do require them. So, but just to, you know, pick who you really feel like you are connected with, who knows you, who you've developed enough of a relationship with, where they might speak to different aspects about you other than just you as a student.
Thank you. Sorry, Bari, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say a question came in that maybe is related to this. Since both of your institutions on the teacher side of things have optional recommendations, if you could clarify if a student, let's say, who's especially interested in a particular area like music, would it be okay to have somebody outside of school, let's say a music teacher who isn't associated with school, write a letter? And I know with optional letters, there's more flexibility, but if you could just speak to that to clarify for our audience.
I think that is, you know, complete, as long as you're not sending it to a school that has limited your number of recommendations. But, you know, for us, since we don't require them and there's not a limit per se, certainly, you know, we get a lot of applications, so we don't want to have 5 different recommendations coming in for somebody. But if there's somebody who is not a school teacher, but somebody that you have worked with, I mean, it could be, you know, a music teacher somewhere. It could be somebody that, you know, you worked for. It could be, you know, somebody that you're involved, a community organization that you're involved with, that you have a close relationship. So anybody that can really speak to your character and you as a person is an appropriate recommendation, as long as you're not sending more than you're allowed.
And it would be different at schools where they're requiring 1 or 2 teachers and they're more specific about what would sort of count as one of those teachers, which again underscores the importance of knowing each of your schools and how they approach this part of the process.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
When it comes time for the students to actually start filling out their common application in the member section, so the individual questions that each of your schools ask them, they have lots of options, right? They can list a major. Sometimes they're selecting from within a school. Sometimes they don't have to do any of that. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like at your schools and if the selection of that major, if that matters on your application review process?
No impact on this end. I think Tulane is really specific in that regard. We have 5 undergraduate schools, but you do not apply to a specific school or specific major. You apply to Tulane as a whole. And so regardless of what you indicate as your major, we are admitting you with the understanding that if you are accepted and you enroll, that we think you can be successful in any of our 5 schools, any of our 75 majors and minors to pick from. And so we're not looking for certain things on your transcript because you picked a certain possible major. We're just reviewing our students holistically.
So we do have some majors that are just so much, you know, more, I don't know, like to say popular, but we just get so many more applications for certain majors. So we have, you know, it just makes it more competitive because of that. So there are definitely some programs. I mean, every year our business program is, you know, extremely competitive. I don't say that to discourage anybody. You should absolutely apply for what you're passionate about and interested in. But there are, you know, definitely some majors that are going to be a little bit more competitive. And, you know, often most students don't have just one thing that they are interested in. So it's always good to really investigate. At Penn State, we have 275 majors, and many of them are related to business. I actually met a student today who is doing a psychology major with a business minor. The business minor is actually in our College of Liberal Arts, not in our School of Business. So I would say definitely explore. I mean, you only know what you know, and I think students tend to just put down what they've heard of. There's a whole world out there to explore, and every school has so many opportunities at this point to engage virtually, as well as just learning more things on our websites. We've had to really step up our game because of COVID, so take advantage of that. We have every program listed, different courses you take in those programs, different career paths. So make sure you're aware of everything that is out there. But we definitely, and also there are certain majors that have prerequisites. If you're applying to engineering, for instance, you want to at least have had pre-calculus. So if you haven't, you're not going to be a good candidate for engineering, which is not to say you're never going to get into engineering. It's just saying that you're not going to be able to really start in engineering until you fulfill those prerequisites. So there is definitely a little bit of a difference based on what you're applying for.
Thank you. That's helpful. And it's, as Bari said before, it's so different from school to school. And so it's important to do your research.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I mean, Tysha and I are not unique in the fact that we love to speak to people. We love to engage with students and, parents if they have questions. So reach out. Every school you can call and find out who the counselor you should be speaking to is. We're very happy to hear from students, to answer any questions, help guide you with our application process. There are similarities with all of us, but they're all very different, and don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Now on to scores, which even though they're optional at both institutions, if you could speak a little bit about if you have statistics for either percentage of students this year who applied without scores or who were admitted, that would be helpful. And also speak a little bit about how you see the scores and how you consider super scores or not, given other sections and things like that. People are very, very curious about this piece. When you're super scoring, are you really super scoring, or is it sort of looking at all the different sections and context and things like that?
So I guess I can start. So we are test optional, but we do not super score at Penn State. So whatever it is that your highest score on one test is, I know that's not as most schools are super scoring. We don't happen to. But that being said, test optional truly does mean test optional. About 60% of our students applied without test scores, and about 60% of our students that enrolled applied without test scores. So it really did not impact your ability to be admitted at all. My recommendation for a school that's test optional is to take the test, see how you do. If your scores are really strong, they speak to your strengths, they are enhancing your application, then by all means submit them. A great test score can definitely help. If you have terrible test scores, do not submit them. They're not going to, it could hurt you. It's definitely not going to help you. And by not submitting test scores, you're not in any way hurting yourself. We're just looking at other factors more carefully. With Penn State, we're looking more specifically not only at your high school transcript, but also we do look at, if you're applying for a STEM field, we are very carefully looking at your grades in math and science. So, and even more so if you are not submitting test scores. So, definitely take advantage of the fact that make it work to your advantage. Take the scores. We publicize our middle 50% ranges. You can easily see where you fall and make the determination of whether your scores are going to help you or not.
And Laurie, for you guys where you're taking the best composite, if a student has two scores, whether it's an SAT or ACT composite or a score on the SAT, and they're going to send the best one with the highest sort of total,
right.
Would you recommend a student send a second set of scores if maybe there was a higher section, even though you're not going to super score it, or are you really just focusing on the highest single score?
We're just going to look at the highest single score, but I think Penn State is a little bit unique in that. So for most other schools, you probably are going to have the opportunity to super score, but for us, we're just going to look at your highest score. I think, I don't know, I'm speaking just, I don't have any facts about this, but I get the sense that our middle 50% ranges might be a little bit higher next year because those that did submit their test scores tended to have higher test scores. So, don't let that scare you, but that, you might see that when you're looking at different schools, middle 50% ranges next year.
For sure. Thank you for raising that point. Tysha, what about at Tulane?
Yeah, I think test optional has definitely caused a lot of questions for families, which is to be expected. Testing has been such a standard part of the college admission process for so long. But similarly, we do mean test optional. And so I don't have the data points, honestly, on the percentage that applied test optional versus didn't for the last cycle. But I know that we saw significantly more test optional applicants than we expected. We admitted significantly more because we saw more applicants that were test optional. And we're really trying to honor that for students. And so if you don't send a test score, I'm not going to assume that your test score would have been low. I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm just going to focus on your transcript for that academic summary of how you did throughout high school. I typically tell students very similarly, if you're in our 50th middle percentile, cool, send us test scores. We're happy to review them. But I think something to think about, if you have a 4.0 GPA and you're on the lower end of our 50th percentile, do we need the test score? I mean, a 4.0 kind of looks good on its own, doesn't it? And so definitely something for you, your family, and your counselor to think about. Now, let's say your GPA is a little lower or you struggled a bit one academic year and your test score is pretty solid and you feel like it adds value to the academic profile that you want to show us. Cool, send it to us. We're happy to review it. But sending test scores or not is very much based on the student and the bigger picture that they're trying to show us. And so it very much is an individual decision that, quite frankly, we just can't make for you. But either decision that you make, we're happy to review your application holistically and see if you can be a good fit academically for us.
Great. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit now about notification plans and the different ways that students can apply to your schools. So thinking about applying earlier in the cycle, does it benefit a student to apply earlier in the cycle, or is the deadline just the deadline, like when we're thinking about rolling admission?
I know for Tulane, definitely early in terms of early decision and early action, those rounds I typically recommend for students. Regular decision is by far the most competitive round at Tulane University. It's when we receive the most applications. And so that is just more competitive. And so I say, if we're a school that you really want to hopefully go to, I would recommend applying one of our early rounds. Now, let's say you're applying early action. If you apply, 3 months earlier, it doesn't really impact that drastically, the difference of your chances of being admitted, as long as you're applying one of those early rounds versus timeline early within a specific round. I hope that's kind of great.
Thank you.
Yeah. At Penn State, it is absolutely a huge advantage to apply early action. And the nice thing about early action is that we do not offer early decision. So early action is not binding. You apply by November 1st, you hear by December 24th. You don't have to let us know until the National College Decision Day of May 1st. But we get lots and lots of applications. The students that apply early action are reviewed first. We make decisions, we give out spots, we have then less to give. The later it gets in the cycle, the more competitive it gets. So the best thing you can do to increase your chances of admission at Penn State is to apply early action.
Great. Thank you. So you mentioned this earlier, Tysha, about the supplemental essays being really important in the Tulane process. And so I wanted to just give you a chance maybe to say that again and talk about how they are used since they are listed as optional on the Common Application. And then Laurie, of course, if you wanted to talk about maybe the difference between, the Penn State supplemental question, which is similar to the main Common App essay, and whether or not you recommend students should submit both.
So I love talking about our optional essay. It is probably my favorite part of reading applications. I will make a note that for the first time, we actually added an additional optional statement. This one is focused on students having a chance to share their identity or their experience with us, whether it's cultural, sexual orientation, think family, cultural. So it's more about like diversity and sharing a bit about your identity with us. That one's optional. My biggest piece of advice for that is like take the word optional, like genuinely. If you don't have anything that you want to share or you don't feel like disclosing that, no pressure, no worries at all. But if you do, we're happy to learn a bit more about you in that way. Now, the optional essay that I get super excited for, because we've had it for a while, is the Why Tulane essay. Y'all, I love this essay like more than I love personal statements. Like, I think it is so exciting as a counselor to read why students are applying to your university, what they're excited about, what they want to bring to the community. I mean, we've had essays where students are like talking about the rain puddles when they came to visit campus, but how like they saw the rainbow in light of the storm that they were in. Like, it can be just really exciting to see your excitement for a university. And I like to tell students, if you are struggling, like seriously struggling with an optional why X school university optional statement, maybe take a second and ask yourself, like personally, why am I applying? This is not a question that's meant to trip you up or to be difficult. Do a little self-reflection, be honest. We're not looking for specific answers. And so share that excitement with us. And I think it can really make a difference in the application process for us, because we are a school that wants to admit people that want to be here. And so that's one easy way, I think, to really make it clear to us that you're excited and what you're hoping to get out of a Tulane experience.
Yeah, I love that advice that it's not meant to trip students up, because I think that, you know, the supplemental essays, they take a lot of time for students to write them and for them to write them well. But if they're really struggling with that, like you said, maybe that school shouldn't be on the college list. Maybe it's not the right choice for them. So yeah.
And I'll add one thing also. I think they're maxed at like 800 words. 800 words is a lot. Like, you could give us a solid 500 and answer the question sufficiently, and we are genuinely happy. So like, also don't feel as if you need to take up every word to answer the question. I mean, like, all right, 2 or 3 sentences, maybe that's not sufficient, but as long as you are answering the question fully and you feel like, yeah, this is how I feel, chances are don't worry too much about the word count.
Right. They don't need to get all the way to 799. It's okay. They can do it in 500, right? Yeah. And then, Laurie, did you want to talk about the Penn State?
Sure. So the Penn State, most of our students at this point are applying on the common application, and we do look at that essay. But there is an optional essay on when you fill out the after you fill out the common application, you do still have to fill out a My Penn State profile. There are some students that apply just on the My Penn State application, but for most students, you're applying to many schools. It just makes more sense to apply on the common application. So the Penn State the essay on the My Penn State profile or My Penn State application is optional. But you know, as I tell my own children, nothing's really optional. And you're doing this, do it well, put your heart into it. We don't have a specific why Penn State essay, but I will tell you that when I'm reading this supplemental essay and students tell me why they want to be at Penn State and what they would take advantage of, that goes a really long way, because as Tysha said, we want to admit students that want to be here. Certainly, we all like to be liked, and if we know that you want to come, that gets our attention. So take advantage of the opportunity. I mean, I look at these supplements as an opportunity, not really as a supplement that you have to do. It's an opportunity to share. You know, your general essay is going to be that, you know, general and about you. And it's something that you're going to share with every university that you apply to. But your supplemental essays gives you an opportunity to be specific to a specific school. You know, not every time, but in our case it does, because it's really pretty much a topic of your choice. So take advantage of the opportunity and let me know why you want to be there. It definitely can only help you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And then what about supplemental material in general? Sometimes students are, you know, especially interested in drawing or painting or photography or music, and they wonder, does it make sense to send in, you know, a portfolio or put a URL in where you can go and look at their work? Do you have the time to do that? Is that making a difference in decision making, given that unless they're of course applying to a program that's like portfolio based or requires something like that? You know, we want students to do it if it makes sense, but if it's something that realistically, you know, can't really be reviewed in a meaningful way and make change decisions per se, sometimes it's a lot for them and it may make sense to prioritize. So could you speak about just supplemental materials like that in general?
So for our art programs, there is a portfolio. It is reviewed by our art people. We have a specific admissions person in the arts and architecture school, so they will look at that. So if you're applying to a specific program that it's required, obviously you would submit it. But if you're not applying to a program that's required, if I'm just reading a general application, I'm not necessarily qualified to read an art portfolio. But again, if that would be required anyway, it would be read by somebody in our art department. I mean, if you've done something, if you've done research and you want to include an abstract, it's certainly, I might not understand what you did, but I certainly can appreciate what you've done, and certainly good to see that you've done it. So certainly anything like that, it can't hurt to include. But I think for most things that would require either an audition or a portfolio, they will be reviewed by somebody who's really qualified to read those or hear those.
But those are for programs where it would be required, like a
Correct.
typical arts and sciences student who says, oh, I draw and I want to share some of my drawings, more like that. That sounds like it's more realistically, you're not going to be able to evaluate that in a give it a full assessment.
In a meaningful, right. Look, you certainly, if you have it and you want to include it, it's fine. I certainly wouldn't add to the stress of applications thinking that it's important to include that, because it's going to be a very last thing that we might look at as an additional thing. But it's certainly not worth the stress that it might cause you if you haven't had something all set and prepared.
I always say that, like, I'm a generalist, so I know if it's really bad, but once it's good, like, I don't know then, like, how good. And my expectation is that, admissions officers are very similar in that regard, and that when there's a portfolio, of course, that's required, of course, it's getting sent to faculty who know how to review this stuff. Tysha, is it different at Tulane?
Very similar, unless we're talking about like architecture, which requires a portfolio. I mean, they're completely optional. So if you want to send it, cool, we'll look at it, whether it's an art piece or someone singing or playing the piano or whatever it may be. We'll review it, we'll look at it, but typically it doesn't play a huge role in the decision-making process, mostly because I am not qualified to make those decisions. But sometimes it's cool to just see, but I would say definitely students, like, if this feels like an additional stressor and you want to create this whole new thing just to add to your application for a school like Tulane, honestly, not necessary. If you have something already and you want to include it, cool.
Great. Tysha, can you talk to us a little bit about the virtual interviews that Tulane offers, and how important are they? Are they adding a lot of value to a student's application? I know that there's probably not a slot for every student who's hoping to do one, so maybe just talk us through how you're reviewing those.
Yeah, absolutely. So we typically offer virtual interviews from probably about like late May through mid-October. All of our counselors offer them. And so throughout the summer, there are typically lots of slots for students if they're interested in a virtual interview. They are completely optional. And so, if you don't feel like you're a strong interviewer or the thought stresses you out, it's not required in any regard. But I think for students who want to get to know Tulane better, or who want some one-on-one time with someone who works in our office, whether it's a full-time staff or current student, it's a really great opportunity. It's not often that you get 20 minutes alone with someone who works in the admission office. And so I think it's something that a lot of students should take advantage of if they're interested in us. Not like this week, but like traditionally, it's a great offering to try to get involved in. And in the review process, typically what we'll see is a interview report that'll give us a little bit insight on how the conversation went, things that was discussed. And so it's one of many things that we review in the application process, which means similar to like, a math equation, that's one additional variable for the larger picture that we're creating. If you don't have that interview, you are not doing yourself a huge disservice. It's just one less variable for the larger picture that we're trying to get.
Great. And that kind of leads us into the next thing we want to ask about is demonstrated interest. And this might be an area that looks slightly different for each of your schools. But if you could talk to us about, how a student might express this for your school, and then how is it used then when you're looking over their applications?
So I was actually going to add to the, we don't offer interviews. However, I am always happy to have a phone conversation or a Zoom call with any student. And, we technically do not track interest. However, we're all human. We like, we all, like to know that people like us. And so we, if I know that a student has been reaching out to me, I can't help but pay a little bit extra attention to that student. So it can never hurt. And even if a school does not technically track interest, again, if you're reaching out to the person reading your application, and not all the time, and
right,
not
within normal healthy boundaries.
Right, exactly. So a little with legitimate questions, or
Be
even if you
careful
just
what
want to
you
say
wish
hello.
for, Laurie.
Right.
I know, but you know what? But it definitely cannot hurt you. And for all of us, we all have systems in place where we know if you're opening our emails. So I have to say, open your emails. We, not that, again, that's not going to impact you getting admitted or not, but we are aware of who is expressing interest, even if it's not something that we're necessarily using in the application process. And again, it's just, if I've been in contact with a student over the past 6 months, I'm definitely going to, be giving an extra look to that student.
Thank you.
Yeah, demonstrated interest is something that we notice at Tulane University. We try to be really transparent about that with students. I think demonstrated interest is almost like a check yes or check no kind of box, sometimes how we look at it. So have you engaged with us in some way, whether that's a virtual event or coming to campus or doing an interview or signing up for our newsletter? Just in what ways have you engaged with us or tried to learn about us as a university and as an institution? Because we want to know that you want to be here and that you took the time to see if we are a good fit for you. And so it's definitely something that we notice. It can sometimes be when you have 2 last applicants and only 1 spot left, right? And we're reading who sent the optional Y Tulane and who didn't, or who did connect with us in some way versus not at all. Of course, that's not always a deciding factor in any regard, but it can give you that little extra boost that you need sometime. So I definitely recommend connecting with us, learning about us, reaching out to your counselor if you have genuine questions, because we want to see that you're putting in that little bit of effort with us.
And we actually just have a few minutes left. So just as a sort of end question, I don't know if you have statistics about a lot of colleges over enrolled this past year. If you have the statistics, have you over enrolled, or just even aside from that, are there any changes to the admissions process or the way that you're approaching reading this year, given just the general state of our world at the moment? If you could share that, that would be helpful.
Honestly, not that I know of. That may change in the coming months. I think right now our goal is really focusing on connecting with students, counselors, and families, getting the questions that you have answered, giving you information that can be helpful, not only in learning about Tulane, but in your college search process in general. And so to my current knowledge, we're gonna continue with how we review applications. The only major change is that additional optional statement that we have now added to our Common App review. But beyond that, I think our train is running in the way that it has been.
And Tysha, you guys are doing in-person events where possible, yeah?
Yes, so we will be, traveling this fall. So look out for when or how your admission counselor may be coming to your home city and state. And that should hopefully be starting in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Oh, and same. I don't think there'll be any major changes in what we're doing as far as reading the applications are going. We were where we wanted to be last year. We are also out and traveling. It's a definite hybrid mode. We've got some things in person. We are offering in-person things as well as virtual opportunities to engage at Penn State. As admissions counselors, we are going out on the road, but not every school is having us come in. So we're kind of doing a mix of things. We're really happy to engage however is best for each school.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate you not only taking the time, but being really honest and making this a useful and helpful hour for all of us. So thank you so very much. And we'll be in touch, all of us. I think that's one of the things we learned tonight, right? But thank you again so much. And we wish you the best of luck during this cycle, and especially to you, Tysha, and to everyone at Tulane. We hope for a quick and safe recovery, and hopefully campus back in the swing of things soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.